Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christina Jambaska, and I am a product manager for Rio Solutions here at GRESB. Thank you so much for joining us today. On today's event, we are going to talk about Rio Solutions. This is GRESB's new product line that aims to resolve one of the industry's biggest upcoming challenges, which is the insights and granularity needed out of asset level data. For over 15 years now, GRESB has been providing ESG information to fund managers and investors to facilitate the data transfer of ESG information at the fund level. We have done that for quite a while now, but in the last couple of years, what we have identified as an industry is that the challenge to decarbonize the built environment is much more dire and much more urgent than we thought before. To be able to do that, there is a need for an additional level of insights and analytics to complement the fund level analysis, which has to target the performance of individual assets. This is exactly where Rio Solutions is coming into play. And the first product out of that product line is Rio Benchmarks. Rio Benchmarks is a dynamic dashboard which is aimed at real estate fund managers. And the purpose of the dashboard is to allow real estate participants to understand the ESG performance of individual assets in their portfolio. What it does is it allows for an energy and GHG analysis of individual assets. It fills in gaps in the data when that's necessary. It allows also for a comparison against granular asset level benchmarks from the GRESB dataset. For today's program, I am very happy to be joined by my colleagues Parag Rastogi and Emma Storm. They are going to talk about the science and the methodology behind GRESB's asset data and how we are using that to construct asset level benchmarks and also filling gaps in the data with our estimation model. Then I'm very happy to be joined by Lilia Kuzmina from East9. She's the head of sustainability there and is also one of the first users of Rio Benchmarks. With her, we are going to enter a conversation to discuss what are the use cases and the challenges that she's facing from a practical perspective and how Rio Benchmarks is going to help her resolve that. Finally, Chris Pike and Roxana Isayor are going to talk about the long-term direction behind Rio Solutions and what does it mean for the evolution of GRESB as a whole. Without further ado, Parag and Emma, please take it over.
Okay, looks like we're live. Hi, everybody. I'm Parag Cameron Rastogi, and I'll let Emma introduce herself.
Hi. Thanks, Parag, and thanks, Christina. Yeah, my name is Emma Storm. I'm a data scientist here at GRESB.
Yes, and I am Director of Real Asset Analytics. So I'll kick us off with a discussion about what GRESB asset data is, since you'll hear a lot of that word throughout the seminar, and that's the foundation of everything we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to try and work these slides. Okay, so what is it? It's data on the performance of individual assets, as it says on the tin. So for real, that is single buildings or a group of buildings. And in GRESB-wide, in the whole GRESB universe and the GRESB frameworks, the definition of an asset can be quite varied. And in fact, this is a whole different rabbit hole that we won't discuss in this webinar, but there's a lot of ongoing work in GRESB to have a consistent and usable framework for defining an asset throughout the sectors and across the industry and basically society-wide. So for now, we are looking at 4 performance indicators for assets: energy use on-site, GHG emissions from purchased energy or on-site combustion, could also be purchased, water use, and waste generated. And just to be clear, this is the data that gets aggregated at the fund level to create your GRESB rankings, right? So this is very much part of the same system. All the good stuff you're used to, this is very much part of that same system. And as you're aware of it, we've been collecting this data for the last 4 or 5 years, right? It has, well, the reason we got into this, the reason that a lot of people requested us to get into this, of course, is because if you're talking about decarbonization, it's good to plan, of course, at the fund level, but funds don't decarbonize. Individual assets decarbonize. So what that is to say is that actions are performed at the actual asset level, at the individual asset level. For example, you change a gas boiler for a heat pump, you install solar PV, you have a maintenance contract for something. These all happen at the asset level. It is crucial to track these actions that happen on assets and the performance that results from them at the asset level. Because of course, if you start aggregating, only aggregating, and you only look at aggregated figures, you lose track of which asset is actually doing what, and that could really derail your decarbonization plans. And so, in the GRESB framework, a credible decarbonization plan would consist of elaborated, proper, enumerated actions at the asset level, right? Interventions at the asset level. The real products that you heard Christina mention, they are based on this asset data. So that's benchmarking and real statistics. They consist, for the moment, they're only talking about energy and GHG. The same database and models underlie all products, both of these and any future ones to come. This consists of about 162,000 assets. Well, there are 162,000 assets in the entire GRESB database with varying levels of completeness. And we use the highest quality, about 60 to 65,000 assets, to actually create the benchmarks and estimation for the real products. And Emma will talk about that in a little bit. Just to give you a little breakdown of the variety of it, there are about 65 countries represented, 11 sectors, and more than 10,000 cities. Of course, what the definition of a city can vary quite a bit, but this is a rough number just to give you an idea of the sheer variety of locations we cover. The floor area is more than 5 billion square meters, so that's approximately 3 times the size of London. The energy usage is significant, it's 315 billion kilowatt hours, so about the energy production of France. And the GHG emissions being tracked is 90.5 megatons, or billions of kilograms, which is about the emissions of Tanzania. So, we're starting from, nothing 40 years ago to tracking a significant amount of space, significant amount of energy and GHG emissions. It's just continuing to grow. Just to give you a little bit of breakdown on what the regional and various other separations look like. North America dominates, but Europe is pretty close. Asia is starting to actually really ramp up quite fast, led by hotspots like Singapore and Hong Kong. We have Oceania, of course, a smaller market, but also very high coverage, and Africa just sort of opening its account. And the reason Americas is so large is because of the USA, because it's a very large market and it has high participation. So you can see it, in country-wise rankings, it dominates. You do see that some smaller countries like Switzerland, so that's CH, and Sweden, that's SE, do punch above their weight, given the size of their population. But yeah, there's a significant spread, although it is heavily skewed towards North America and Western Europe. And finally, in terms of sectors, the dominant sectors are industrial, office, retail, and residential. And then the other sectors make up the tail. Industrial didn't used to be so dominant until a couple of years ago, and then suddenly it's really raised its prominence to the point where it's actually changed the distributions for different countries. So it is something that has gained a lot of prominence in recent years in GRESB. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Emma to talk about how we use this data for benchmarking estimation.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Parag. So how do we actually use this this data for benchmarking and estimation? So this breadth and depth of the asset data that Parag mentioned in the GRESB universe really allows us to create very granular benchmark groups to allow the really granular comparison of individual assets against meaningful benchmarks. And so these benchmarks are used in the Real Solutions product suite. And in particular, for real benchmarks, we can exploit this high-quality subset of assets that Parag described earlier to create really granular and representative groups for benchmarking performance. This high-quality subset of assets is also used to fill in missing gaps in performance data for individual assets as part of the our GRESB estimation model, or GEM, as we like to call it. So if you switch to the next slide. Yes, so as I mentioned earlier, the depth and the breadth of the GRESB asset universe allows for very granular comparison groups. But of course, if you just compare, global benchmarks, comparing global benchmarks irrespective of asset use types is not very useful. The energy use and carbon emissions from buildings obviously strongly depends on where the building's located and what kind of building it is, like what is it used for. So these are currently the key characteristics that we use to create meaningful benchmark groups. So these groups are created at different levels of granularity. And that means for location, we step through various levels going from country to region to global. And for asset use, we step from the most granular level that we have, which is property subtype, up to sectors. So the majority of assets in the GRESB universe actually get assigned to a benchmark group that's at the most granular level, which is a good way of understanding the depth and the breadth of our data. And that means the most granular benchmark group possible is the country and subtype level. So how do we use these benchmark groups to estimate missing data? The GRESB estimation model, it uses a combination of imputation and extrapolation to fill in missing gaps in performance data. So that means when no energy data is available, if an asset has no energy data, then we will be able to fill in this asset's missing data with median intensity values, median intensities from the relevant benchmark group for that asset. And when an asset has some, but not all data on its energy use available, we'll be able to use the asset's reporting information in combination with benchmark group values to fill in the missing gaps. So for example, if an asset has, say, 75% data coverage for energy, so it knows, the asset manager knows most of the energy used for the building, but is missing some particular spaces or particular energy types, we'll be able to estimate the remaining 25%. And this is done at the most granular level that we can do it at by basically taking the reported information about both the spaces covered and the energy types covered. So to give you an example of that, if we have, say, if there's an asset that only has energy data available for, let's say, the common areas, the landlord-controlled spaces of a building, we'll estimate the data just for the tenant space. So we'll fill in the missing tenant space data. And if an asset only has data on electricity use, for example, but and knows that their building is covered or supplied with fuels like natural gas, but doesn't know the use of that natural gas, then we'll also be able to take that information into account as well when estimating the missing energy data. So then we'll be able to have a complete picture of each asset's energy use based on both reported and estimated data from the GRESB estimation model, from the GEM. And then from here, the GEM will calculate GHG emissions using our own database of location-based emissions factors. And so that means the GHG emissions that you see in real benchmarks from the GEM are going to be calculated in a consistent and very comparable way. So on the next slide, I'll show an example of how the GEM can provide more accurate estimations. So this graphic shows a comparison between two different estimation approaches. So one approach is a simple estimation based on linear extrapolation, and the other is the results from the GEM. So this graphic represents a typical Dutch multifamily residential building. And this residential building only has energy consumption data available for the common areas, so the landlord-controlled spaces. If you just use a simple linear extrapolation, you'll grossly underestimate the total energy use of that building. And that makes a lot of sense. The common areas and the tenant spaces use energy in completely different ways. So it's expected that you can't just apply a simple linear extrapolation. But using a combination of both extrapolation and imputation of benchmark group values, the GEM is able to give a much more accurate estimate of the true energy use of this asset. And so on the next slide, I'll talk about why you can trust in the quality of the output of the gem. So to ensure that the benchmark groups and the estimates returned by the gem, the GRESB estimation model, are of high quality, we have several different layers of data quality checks and procedures in place. So aside from the comprehensive validation rules that are present in the GRESB asset portal, which ensure that an asset's data align with the GRESB reporting rules, we also have an automated outlier detection model in place to detect basically unusual intensity values. And assets with outliers by default are excluded from the creation of benchmark groups. And there are also additional criteria on benchmark group creation, like a minimum threshold of assets required for each group. And this minimum threshold ensures both that the benchmark groups created are sufficiently anonymized, and also that the statistics that you get out of that group, the medians, the means, are actually representative of the group. So these meaningful and representative benchmarks are used as part of the GEM to give users high quality estimates of both energy and GHG performance data when it's missing. And so I'll hand it off back to Parag to wrap up.
Yes, as Emma and I went through, so the GRESB database itself is quite global and extensive. The latest version of the database includes more than 62,000 assets. We're looking at, how benchmarking and estimation does need some more sort of granularity. So we have control for things like location and usage, and of course this will expand as we improve our models. And assets with incomplete data are accepted. So you can give us assets with incomplete data, and we can estimate the remaining portion with GEM, as it were. So we'll end on that, and we will we'd welcome any questions, of course, afterwards. You can email info@gresb.com. And if you really want to hear a lot more about this, I think we're going to plan some webinars where we dive deeper into all aspects of this data. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Parag and Emma, for showing us the breadth and the depth of the GRESB asset dataset, how we currently use it for benchmarking and estimation, and also how we ensure the quality of the data. Now I'm joined by Lilia Kuzmina. Hi, Lilia. Very nice to have you here.
Hi, Christina. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Lilia is one of the first users of Rio benchmarks, but before we dive into how do you find value in the tool and what do you want to use it for, can you tell us a little bit more about East9's portfolio and how do you currently handle your asset level data?
Yeah, absolutely. East9 is a listed real estate company with the headquarters in Stockholm, but our operations are actually outside of the Nordics. Compared to the industry giants, we have a relatively small portfolio, about 250,000 square meters of commercial properties. But from a sustainability perspective, it's very good quality portfolio. 95% of our assets are either LEED Platinum or BREEAM Outstanding certified. And I think we've been with GRESB for the last 5 years, and the highest score that we have been able to achieve is 92, just those who are interested. We currently track our asset level data with an in-house custom-made system for energy performance, and of course plenty of Excel sheets for tracking different kinds of KPIs. That's what we use for asset level data. And on portfolio level, of course, we've been leveraging the data supplied by the GRESB benchmark report, because this helps us to understand our standing vis-a-vis industry in general and our immediate peers, and of course fill in the gaps where we feel that more improvement is needed.
Great. And so currently, how do you evaluate performance at the asset level with your current set of tools?
Well, we do, as I said, we have this in-house energy performance system, and this system has been launched for about a year ago. Before that, it has been a challenge, like for many of our peers. We are in a privileged state, given the relatively small size of our portfolio. We have very good understanding of where each asset is, and on top of that, we have 100% data coverage. As an owner, we provide electricity to the tenants, so we have no shaded areas or any gaps in our data. And the team who's developed this in-house system is supporting us with the competence for data analysis, data tracking, goal setting, and investment planning for those assets.
I see. But so currently, do you use any reference values from the industry to be able to gauge where exactly do you land in terms of performance, or do you know how you perform against your peers?
Yes, exactly. That's why I got so excited when I seen this new product, because that's normally has been a gap we have in the markets where we have been present for a while. We have kind of anecdotal evidence. Of course, we talk to the peers, we talk to the consultants who do certifications for us. So we have a feeling and understanding. And then, of course, we look at the annual reports of our peers, and that's how we collect the data. But there's no systemic follow-up of kind of comparable performance where we could dynamically compare and track our asset level performance with those of our market. And in our particular case, actually, the reason why I was so quick to react and do the pilot and for this product is that we acquired a property last year in a new market, Poland, and still at this point, I have not acquired good knowledge. I have not been able to find any data set on real energy performance for that market. And in the team, we were very interested to compare performance of this property with some kind of market average. So when I contacted the GRESB team, and Kevin let me know that there is actually a specific Poland benchmark with 30 assets on that, I was quite excited to get hold of that data and see our standing vis-a-vis that benchmark. But even for the markets where we have much better knowledge, which is Baltics is our home market, that was very valuable to see the performance with the Nordic benchmark, because we kind of we think that those two markets are very much similar in terms of climate conditions, technologies used, and that's the kind of gold standard that we use when we evaluate the performance of our assets in Lithuania and Latvia. So we were quite happy to see that the opportunity to compare our assets to the Nordic benchmark as well.
That's great. And I'm very happy to hear that, because that's exactly the problem that we've been trying to solve, is understand and find the need for comparable and robust benchmarking at the asset level. Now that you have that information, you mentioned a couple of times that what you want to do with that is ultimately understand the performance of your assets better. Is there any other goal or any other purpose behind understanding that information that goes beyond just an analysis for your internal teams? Let's say, what other use cases do you have for those benchmarks, and how do you intend to use them to inform your strategy in the future?
Well, I think this just in general, there is a general lack of this type of data in the market, at least based on my experience. It might be different in the markets outside of the Nordics and the Baltics. But that's my take on the general situation. If we look, for example, within the EU taxonomy framework, one of the criteria for defining a building as a green asset is being within this 15% top performing assets. And how do you define those 15 top performing assets? Normally, it has been a challenge. And I know for some of the markets, still EPC data is used in order to define this 15% top performance. And as we all know, EPC data is not really a good proxy for the real asset performance because it can overstate energy intensity for assets above A grade, as it's in very many countries, it's based on energy models rather than, of course, actual performance. And for those assets that do not, that are kind of bad performance below maybe C grade, it can understate the performance as you do not account for your energy optimization journey, which might have been significant since the time that this EPC certificate has been issued. So using some kind of real life data for defining this criteria for 15% top performing assets would be, of course, a better approach than still relying on EPC rankings data. So I would really love to see the kind of the progress that GRESB makes in terms of providing support for this kind of work that we do in the industry.
Definitely. Something else that you touched upon is the need to compare performance against the local building stock. And something that we've heard quite a lot is the buildings that you report to GRESB, they already undergo a certain filter of, okay, these are already investment grade real estate, they are ESG conscious, so at least the management is set in place to ensure that those assets do perform better than the average building stock. The benchmarks that real benchmarks is based off of do come up from the GRESB dataset. So you can imagine that there is a natural tweak in the data on you are actually being compared against probably better buildings than the general building stock. How would you integrate that into your use of real benchmarks? And is that something that you see as a benefit, or is that something that you might want to consider in a different way going forward?
Well, that's I think that's a very relevant remark. That's something that, of course, we are aware of and we take into account, but this provides additional confidence if you are overperforming the benchmark. That you are probably in that segment of best performing market segment. So this of course, this is just one of the considerations that you can incorporate into your analysis. And I was just thinking that another, of course, thing that another factor where I think this information would be relevant and useful is, again, when you're looking at a new market as a buyer, we're buying new assets. And as I mentioned already, last year we acquired a property in Poland. And within that context, when you do your ESG analysis, of course, you're looking at energy efficiency. And even though you might have some understanding of where the gold standard is within your home market, it's still kind of difficult to understand where this particular specific market is heading to and what is the gold standard there. So this kind of benchmarks, of course, help to achieve better understanding for the buyers of real estate assets and provide better transparency in general. And of course, with better transparency for energy performance data comes better accountability, and that's where we should. That's what we are all striving for. Since energy transition, that's the process that really needs to be accelerated. And the more data is there, the more comparability in the data, maybe the more meaningful will be this conversation about how do we achieve those decarbonization goals.
Definitely. So you mentioned already the use of real benchmarks and benchmarking information in general for portfolio management and inside analytics to identify the assets where you need to put more effort in. You also mentioned how there might be an interesting use case there around transactions, or when you look to buy a building in the market that you're not that familiar with the building stock, so you need additional support to understand the performance. Is there any other future use case that you can see for benchmarking information, maybe to address a different type of stakeholder, or to basically put the information in front of different eyes or in a different context?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could think that stakeholders like banking industry or even government organization would be particularly interested to see this data in case we want to argue for EU taxonomy alignment of some specific assets, because as I said, at the moment, it's mostly EPC data that steers decision making when it comes to EU taxonomy alignment, at least in our markets. So I would definitely think about that application for, of course, building valuations. At the moment, already now, we are providing CREM data to our building evaluators. So this hopefully will be using the inputs from this product to support this process. So that this, as I said, the more transparency there is, the more data there, the more informed will be the conversation on energy optimization journey.
Great. Thank you so much, Lilia, for sharing with us how you intend on using real benchmarks. And talking about the future use cases for you, I also would like to hand over the conversation to Roxana Isayo and Chris Pike, who are going to also share with us the future direction for Rio Solutions as a whole.
Thank you, Christina and Lilia, for an interesting conversation. Now we're going to go deeper. My name is Chris Pike. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for GRESB, and I'm joined by Roxana Isayo. And Rox, go ahead and tell us who you are and what your connection is here.
Hi, Chris. Hello, everyone. My name is Roxana Isayo. I'm the Chief Product Officer at GRESB, and I've been proudly working with our members on the understanding and interpreting the value of ESG data for more than a decade with GRESB.
Awesome. So, Rox, we're going to go big picture during our time together. Let's start big picture by talking about why real solutions are different. Why are they a step change or an evolution in what GRESB is doing?
So first of all, Real Solutions is a new family of products that is based on real estate asset level data. This is extremely important, very exciting, and a massive step change for GRESB and its members, as it reflects a very natural transition from the portfolio level benchmarking, scoring, and data and data analysis that GRESB is known for, to something that moves more into more data analysis and data insights that give the managers, investors, and other stakeholder groups the tools they need in order to make more informed decisions. So GRESB started and remains a portfolio level benchmarking tool, and we've been collecting information about real estate assets for about 15 years now. As we've been doing that more and more granularly, and as the whole industry has become more sophisticated in the way that it collects the data, engages with their tenants, and understands what the data is, we as GRESB, as a data tool and as a benchmarking tool, we've also been receiving more and more requests and more pressure to utilize or put the value of the entire benchmark to good use for individual managers and help them understand how do their buildings stack up when looking at a regional level, when looking at the national level, when looking at the global level as well. So in other words, understanding the value, understanding the performance of your individual assets as a manager is becoming more and more important, and something that we can increasingly help with and support our members with by utilizing the data that we've been collecting for a long time.
Awesome. All right, let's structure that. So that's the biggest picture. Let's talk about how this is going to roll out over time, because fundamentally, Real is about providing solutions to our current stakeholders and our future stakeholders. So as we go from serving managers today to serving investors in new ways to serving new stakeholders, why did your team elect to start with Real benchmarks and start by serving managers? What was your thought process?
It was a very natural decision, quite frankly. The data that we look at, the data that we work with, comes from the managers. The managers go through the effort and the process, and Lilia will probably testify to that, of logging into the portal and providing all of that data on an annual basis. If we look at the spectrum of managers that are currently in the GRESB universe, we have a group of very sophisticated managers that already have a lot of tools internally that help them understand how their buildings stack up against national stocks and against other similar portfolios. We have a lot of new participants and managers that look at GRESB as a source for new information that would help them generate those insights internally. And then the wide majority of participants are probably somewhere in the middle, where they probably have some internal tools, some generic ways in which they can make sense of the data, but they would benefit, and they would like to use something that they can trust and can easily connect with, in order to make informed decisions about what does good look, what does bad look, what does improvement look like, and how fast can I achieve those improvements. Now, one of the first applications of Real benchmarks, for the managers at least, is helping them interpret their assets as they currently stand. And when it comes to GRESB, we know that managers are particularly interested in understanding how does each of these buildings stack up against or contribute to the overall GRESB score. Let's be honest, the GRESB score is a very competitive mechanism that most managers that all managers actually that report to GRESB are very interested in. And so one of the first questions is, how do I know, or how can I better anticipate, how can I better understand how each of these buildings contribute to the overall score? Okay, great. So that's one of the first questions that we have to answer, one of the first problems we have to solve. Then this tool and gradually this dashboard will also contribute to supporting managers to identify and set up targets, and also track performance against those targets, whether these targets have to do this with the scores or with average intensity values or with other national targets. That's up to the manager to decide. And as we look further down into the future, and as we engage more with the managers that currently participate, but also with the ones that are looking at GRESB as a potential future tool, we'll likely discover new use cases that help everyone make most use of this data. But what's very important to remember and understand is that Real benchmarks is available year-round. You don't have to wait for the GRESB results to come out in order to log into the platform to visualize the individual assets and see how, based on the data that you put in, the assets stack up against other benchmarks. Moreover, where data gaps exist, that data will be complemented with the estimation methodology that GRESB generates. That's consistent, that's explained, that's transparent, that's something that can easily be understood. Moreover, the dashboard automatically edits as new data becomes available. One of the sort of limitations with the existing GRESB cycle is that the reporting period is April till July, but in many cases, more information becomes available afterwards, which managers can't update and can't put it into the system for the purpose of the strict scoring process, because obviously we need to define some very strict boundaries as to what data goes into the scoring, benchmarking, and analysis process. But for the sake of, or for the purpose of understanding the individual assets in the portfolio, that system can be used throughout the year, and it adapts easily to as new information becomes available. We also know that as more reporting regulation comes into play, as well, maybe information is required during transaction processes, so at the buy-sell moment, managers are faced with the need to produce very quick, very fast reports or shoot out information, ESG information about individual buildings. This is potentially one use case of the platform and one use case of the dashboard, either now or maybe in the future. But this is where I think we need to engage more with you, the managers that use the tool, to understand how we can help better.
Rox, I love it. Maybe we can, so just to kind of paraphrase for a second, that vision you have for real benchmarks, serving managers today, helping them improve GRESB outcomes, ultimately helping them identify and prioritize opportunities to improve individual assets, helping transactions where you may be adding or subtracting assets from a portfolio. Can you talk a little bit about how this links to changes in investors? We've seen, as you well know, I mean, you've been there the whole time. When GRESB started, we were a tool for indirect equity investment in real estate. The whole issue was providing transparency in those indirect investments. What does real benchmarks say about changes in investor interest and investor priorities from where you're sitting? What does it reflect?
What's very clear is that investors in general demand more granular data. They are interested and they want to have more visibility into the individual assets within the portfolios. That is still something that's under the full control of the manager. We are simply a means and a channel of information transfer, but the manager still controls all of that information, and it's up to them whether they share the information or not. However, as an investor-led initiative, we feel like we have a responsibility to help managers structure that information in a way that's easily digestible, understood, and interpreted by investors for their purposes as well. So we serve managers in the same way that we serve institutional investors, and we're trying to figure out ways in which we help that information transfer and the communication process to be as seamless as possible, and limit it to the information that's absolutely necessary for them.
Makes a ton of sense. So one thing that you said, I just want to make sure folks take it and then maybe ask for your thoughts on where it goes. You said in your remarks that one of the aspects of real benchmarks is a more dynamic ability to assess assets. In other words, rather than April to June, there's an ability to come back and make changes, to add new data, to edit data, and to see the impact on your scores. That's pretty exciting, and it really does change the dynamic where folks may be in the routine of annually putting everything together in one big chunk, dumping out the GRESB asset level spreadsheet, loading it into GRESB, and doing that routine. Can you speak a little bit about the how and the implications of going to a more year-round assessment process? Where do you see that going, both for real and for perhaps GRESB more generally?
Well, the interest for scoring impact analysis and scenario analysis has always been there, especially for the managers that want to anticipate as much as possible how will any change in the way that I'm operating an asset will be reflected in the final score. And ideally, if I'm a manager that has to report through GRESB, I can anticipate that and understand that before I have to share it with any one of my investors. And so in part, that is the question that we're trying to help managers solve, and the analysis that we're working to solve for managers in the short term. As much as we also don't want to limit the conversation to just scoring impact analysis, because this tool is bigger and more powerful than that, and it's meant to also help managers interpret really the performance of the buildings, because that's what we're talking about. And we see the regulatory space becoming more strict. We see new regulations coming on board, and we talk very often about the minimum requirements of performance for individual buildings in order to stay in line with regulations in general and building code in general. So I can see how gradually the tool can support those type of processes as well, and keep stock of those type of analysis as well, transition risk analysis, potentially physical risk analysis as well in the future.
Awesome. So I think our time is closing out. Christina is anxious to close out the program. So let me just ask for a closing thought. If you were to give people a big picture thought about where this is going, what it means, what would you leave them with as they reflect on what real benchmarks mean and where we're going in the future?
I would say GRESB was created as a means of communication between managers and investors, and the relevant level of conversation was always the portfolio level. I am very excited to see that the industry has evolved so fast and in such a meaningful way towards not just towards using tools like GRESB and towards collecting their data and interpreting their data, not just for the purposes of reporting to investors and engaging in that communication, but also they're actively using that information to make informed decisions to improve the assets, to improve the buildings. We were set up to support investors, support managers in the transition to a net zero economy ultimately. And so we're building tools and we're coming up with solutions that help support that in the best way that we know how. Put the data to good use, interpret the data, contextualize it, create transparency around it, and create metrics that help the readers and the people that digest that information to contextualize it for their own purposes. And the general direction of travel is more granular, more detailed, more scrutinized, at the level where information ends up being assured, verified, and tested.
Perfect. That is the perfect place to leave it. So with that, I want to thank you for giving us that big picture view on the implications of real benchmarks. And we're going to turn it back to Christina to wrap us up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you to all of our speakers today. What we heard today was we started with Parag and Emma, who reiterated to us once again that funds don't decarbonize, actual assets do. And they showed us how the GRESB asset data set is full of a lot of buildings that span a lot of geographies and property sectors. And they showed us how we currently use that in the construction of benchmarks and in estimation methodologies, but also what we do to ensure the quality of the insights that come out of real benchmarks and all other real solutions. Then we heard from Lilia about how real benchmarks is going to help her currently in her work with portfolio management, understanding the performance of individual assets in the portfolio. But she also highlighted some future use cases around the value of benchmarking insights during transactions, in loan issuance, and also in regulatory compliance. Chris and Roxana then showed us that this perfectly aligns with the future plan for real solutions and how we want to make sure that we continue to service different stakeholders in the industry with the same quality data. We are very excited for the future of real solutions, and we are looking forward to being able to service more stakeholders and resolve more of their needs when it comes to granular asset level data. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and I wish you a great day. Bye.